All right, my friends, I am so excited to have my friend Jenna Dillulio here on the podcast, and we are just really glad to have you here. Thanks for joining us, Jenna.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited.
All right, well, give our listeners kind of the high notes of you, the cliff notes, everything they need to know about where you are, what you do, who you do life with. I mean, for starters, you're pregnant. How are you feeling?
I know. I'm pregnant. I feel great. Honestly, I feel like it's like the weirdest thing because I've wanted to be pregnant for a while, and you see pregnant women all the time, but then like to go through it, it's such an experience because your body changes, I feel like, so quickly. And I think that's been the biggest adjustment. But like, I haven't been nauseous. I just feel really lucky with my pregnancy. So.
Amazing. How many weeks are you?
I am 23 weeks today.
Oh, man. Okay. So the second trimester is the best. It's like before you're so big that you are like bumping into walls, but it's past the first trimester with all like the food aversions and the fatigue and all that. Second trimester is the best.
Yeah. It's been, like I said, my first trimester wasn't bad though. Like I feel so lucky. So
yeah, one of those people that's just meant to be pregnant. I love it. Well, tell us more about you and your life, and we'll get into the alcohol part in a minute.
Yeah, so I am 36 years old. I live in Virginia with my husband. We're both from two separate parts of the country. So I'm from like middle of the nowhere, West Virginia, and my husband's from New York City. So now we live in Virginia. We've been here for 7 years now, which is wild to think about. We just bought a house, and I have been open about my sobriety online for like 3.5 years now, I guess. And
well, tell us about your sobriety. How did that come to be? What's the story there?
Yeah, I mean, whenever I was in my early 30s, I could just tell, like, there was a version of me that I had, that I felt like I was living. Like I painted this outside portrait that I worked in corporate America and I ran half marathons and I was this healthy person. I would do these, like complete these tasks that made me look a certain way that I felt, but I was not living that life at all. And I felt unhappy, like extremely unhappy. And I grew up the child of an alcoholic. My dad struggled with alcoholism my whole entire life. But I was the one that I was always on my high horse, like pointing the finger at everybody else, being like, you need to go get help. Like, at everybody in my family, like, you should go to therapy. You should go to rehab. And I just, when my parents came down, they would come down once we moved to Virginia, because I thought Virginia and West Virginia. Let me just explain this.
They're the same to me in my brain.
When I thought like moving to Virginia, like I'm like, they used to be one. Like Virginia and West Virginia used to be one. But it's far, man. Like it wasn't like just like a weekend trip I could go. It was like 8 or 9 hours for me to see my family. Wow. So it became like once a year they would come down for a week. And in 2016, they came down and they spent a week. And that whole week, my dad and I drank, like got blackout drunk together. And I said horrible things to my mom. And this was after multiple, what people would consider like rock bottom moments for myself. But I remember them leaving and me thinking like, holy crap, I turned into this person I said I'd never become. And so that's what kickstarted me going to therapy. And in therapy, I had just such an amazing therapist, Belinda. And the first session, she just was like, how much alcohol do you drink? And I thought, I had never been honest. Like when I went to like my primary care physician, he would ask, or my gynecologist, like I would just be like, I just like a couple of drinks on the weekend, or
just some.
Do you smoke? Never. No. I was honest. I just was like, I drink like 2 to 3 bottles of wine, like 3 to 4 nights a week. And I remember her just being like, oh my gosh, like that's so much. Cause I'm only 5'2", and she's like, you're so short and small. And that was like the first time that I had to be like, shit, I just told like another human being like what I actually do, because it was secretive. Even like my husband was my boyfriend at the time. And like, I don't think he knew me throughout my whole addiction, but I don't think he knew how much it was affecting me or how much I was really drinking.
Well, if you talk about like being in corporate America, running half marathons, I feel like some of us are good at hiding it.
So good. Like but I didn't look like, now when I look back at pictures of myself during that time, like I was so swollen. I looked so unhealthy. But if you just knew me and you just, that's who you knew me as, you would never think. My therapist was like, after I got sober, she was like when you first came in, I noticed how swollen you were and how like red your face was. And those are like telltale signs typically. But
if that's just what people knew you as.
Yeah. And so many people when I got sober were like, oh my, I never would have known you had a problem, or I never would have known that you like were struggling at all. But I think that's a part of the reason why I wanted to be open, was to break that stigma, because people have this like vision of what an alcoholic looks like. Yeah. And it's not a 32-year-old that is successful in corporate America, that's holding a job and that has like a relationship, and that's not what people think of. And so that's why it was important for me too, to be like, this is what it could look like someone that you would never think.
Yeah.
But yeah, after that, it was a lot of relapsing, a lot of trying, and then going back to drinking. And I describe it as like with my father, you know, I believe my dad and I have such a good relationship now. And I truly believe that he did the best that he could with the information that he had. I mean, you look back, first of all, we lived in West Virginia through the 80s and 90s. Like there wasn't a ton of resources like there is now. Like we've got podcasts, we've got like accounts you can follow for inspiration on social media. You can read books, you can get a coach. Like there's so many other resources, and it's not as like shunned as it was back then either. Like we're living through this time where it's cool to better yourself. Like it's a cool thing if you're like, hey, I see this like deficiency here, I could do better, I'm gonna try. And then you use your story to inspire others. Where my dad, my mom, they didn't have that. My dad only had alcohol. And I grew up watching someone only have alcohol, and then I only had alcohol. So that's the only tool I had to reach in my toolbox. When I wrecked my truck and I like almost killed myself and somebody else, I was drinking and driving. Like the irony was, to cope through that, I drank. Like, and as I went through therapy, I learned new coping mechanisms. And so it wasn't just this light switch that I was like, oh, I have alcoholism, like gotta stop this now. It was a slow progression where I went to therapy, I developed new skills, I'd go to therapy, I would slip up and drink. And so it took months and months, but it was like finally alcohol didn't look as shiny and fun anymore. And on November 4th, 2017, I woke up with a hangover, and I thought, I'm really going to give it a go this time. And I had my husband, my mom, and my best friend hold me accountable to that goal. Cause I knew before I had tried so many times to do it by myself, and that wasn't working.
Mm.
Um, and so, yeah, I made it like a week and we
Mm.
celebrated, made it a month, we celebrated. And now this November, it will be 5 years, which
Amazing.
is crazy.
Congratulations. You and I have
Thanks.
very close sober dates. Mine's September 29th, 2017.
Oh,
But you
okay.
talk about your dad not having all the resources we have now, but even you and
Yeah.
I didn't have all the resources we have now. In
No.
2017, it was
No.
still this budding narrative of all of
Mm-hmm.
these different ways to do this, and
Yeah.
that it was actually a cool choice to make. And that, I've got a gal coming on the podcast in a couple weeks. She's 23 and
It's
is like
amazing.
TikTok famous because she talks about sober curiosity. And I'm like, if this had been the conversation that was being had when we were 23, can you even imagine?
It would
But
be so different.
so different. But tell me about what the conversation with your husband and your mom and your family, when you finally said, hey, this is something I need help with. I need accountability. What was that conversation like?
It was open and honest, that was something that I picked up in therapy too. A lot of what I would do
Hmm.
was like stonewalling and just
Yeah.
harboring emotions.
Hmm.
And so that is something that I still work on, is like being
Hmm.
open and honest about how I'm feeling and what I need. And I feel like with my mom, it was the most emotional because I think, she held a lot of guilt
Hmm.
for, feeling like she was a part of the reason
Hmm.
that I was addicted. And but she was willing to do it. She was like, yeah,
Hmm.
I will 100% hold you accountable. I asked them each. I said, if I call you, for my mom and my best friend, because they're not local, or I like my husband, if I say like I want to drink, I need you to tell me no,
Yeah.
because if you give in,
Hmm.
then I'm going to give in.
Hmm.
And it was weird because before I wanted that accountability. If I
Yeah.
did want to drink, I would say, I had a really long day. I would have like this elaborate excuse of like why. Like
Hmm.
I had a really tough week at work. Corporate sales is like tough, man.
Brutal.
It's
Yeah.
very stressful. And I would use that so much. I'd be like, I had a rough week. I just wanna get wine. And like no one would say no to me because
Hmm.
they knew I would argue or I would
Yeah.
say, something about it. But when I asked for it, it not only like gave them permission to hold me
Hmm.
accountable, but it made me more accountable because I not
Totally.
only like didn't want to let myself down, but I knew I didn't want to let them down either.
Hmm.
And then like you add on when we look at social media, right? And we're
Hmm.
like open about our sobriety there. That's like a
Oh,
whole
yeah.
like other level of
Yeah.
accountability that you have.
Yeah, I mean, it's like not even ever an option for me.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not tempted, but like, a really hilarious story. I was at a bachelorette party a while ago, and we were all out at dinner, and one gal forgot her ID, and they were going around, and the waiter was checking IDs, which is funny because we're in our 30s, but the waiter was
Mhm.
checking IDs, and she didn't have her ID, and I was like, I texted her under the table. I was like, just tell me what you want, and I'll order it for you because I had my
Mhm.
ID. But the rest of the group didn't know about that conversation that she and I were having over text. And they watched me order a glass of wine. And across the table, they like were like clutching the table, like, are we watching her fall
Oh.
off the wagon in real time? And like me and this other gal were just, because I don't recommend doing that if you are in
Yeah.
early days, but like for me, it's no big deal. But
Yeah.
like there's just no option in which I could ever drink again, thankfully, because
Yeah.
of the way I talk about this. But I like what you said about the honesty. And
Mhm.
it's really interesting. I think a lot of the time we want the people in our lives to show up how we need them to, but they
Mhm.
don't have all the information. So if we're
Mm-mm.
like saying like, I want a drink, and they don't know that we need them to say no, and we need them to be like, no, Jenna, we're not going to do that. No, Beth, we're not going to do that. If we haven't like given them that radical honesty to say like, I need this, we can't expect the people in our lives to be mind readers. We can't expect them to just know inherently what we need them to do for the support. So I think that's a really interesting piece, and it's scary to be able to step into that space to be able to say, I need
Mhm.
this. So what was that like for you when you were saying like, I need this? What was the internal dialogue in your head there?
I think, I mean, I chose those three people for a reason, but I like 100% was terrified because
Mm,
I knew there wasn't like a going back after that.
yeah.
Like that was it. And before I could easily
Mm,
just be like, yeah, like to myself, right? Because
yeah.
we will totally like let ourselves down before we let other
Yeah.
people down. I feel like we will break
Absolutely.
promises to ourselves. And my internal dialogue with just myself was like, all right, this weekend, like, we're going to do it.
Mm,
And then a friend would call and be like, well, we're going to the winery this weekend. Do you want to come? I'd be like, okay, well, next weekend,
yeah.
like, I'll really try it then next weekend. Where when you have not just one, but three different people holding you accountable, you're like, that's it. Like,
Mm,
I can't like use these bullshit
yeah.
excuses anymore
Yeah.
that I've used in the past.
Well, I think that's exactly it. It's like we just continuously break promises to ourselves. And
Mm-hmm.
as soon as it's out there, as soon as somebody else knows that, hey, this is this thought process that's happening in my brain, these are the experiences I'm having, and like it becomes really real. And that can be
Mm-hmm.
really scary for people. But I hear that in a lot of stories as being the moment when things change. And I think it's really interesting when you talk about having had experiences that objectively, like somebody might say, oh, that was your rock bottom, like crashing your truck, or having these experiences, but it was the weekend with your dad and saying the
Mm-hmm.
things to your mom that was your rock bottom, or the change
Mm-hmm.
agent to finally say like, this is it, I don't want to do this anymore. And I think that's a really important piece to point out to people, because it doesn't have to look one way, and we can have these
Mm-hmm.
other signs in our lives that are really big red flags, and those
Mm-hmm.
aren't the ones that are the change agents. It's the ones that like really hurt our heart and hurt our spirit
Yeah.
and hurt like these interpersonal relationships. You mentioned growing up as a child of an alcoholic, and how did that inform your experience both before and after you quit drinking?
Well, I think before the irony is I I would say like I hate my dad. Like I would say like I hate you throughout my
Mm,
whole life because he had no control. I vividly remember him like watching him experience regret and
mm,
remorse for situations. But he kept repeating it. And because I didn't understand addiction at the time, like I'm like,
mm,
you don't love your family.
mm,
How can you just not stop? Like just quit.
mm,
This happens like every week. We have to do this.
mm.
And I was the oldest. So I was like the protector. Like I was
Yeah.
like protecting my mom. I was protecting my brother. And when I was in high school, I would never even like have considered drinking, which is
Mm,
wild to a lot of people because they're like, I wouldn't even try like drinking
mm,
or going to a party or I didn't start drinking until I got into college. And that's the first time I drank, I blacked out. Like the very first time I drank, I got completely drunk. And um, I think like if I said looking back at seeing my dad my whole life, if you take into account that not only is alcoholism genetic, but I had the example of my father, and what I saw was, well, I saw him celebrate with alcohol.
mm,
If you're stressed, if you're mad, if you're angry, like you can use alcohol as this kind of like excuse.
mhm,
um you know this is why I'm drinking. You made me drink. I've heard things like this my whole life. Michelle, Recovery is the New Black. Yeah. She like hits the nail on the head. She talks about this a lot for parents. My dad would always make me get his beer for him. He would always be like, go to the fridge and get another beer. Go get another beer. Go get another beer. And it just always like, it hits me like in my heart when I read those things, because that's what I did my whole life. But it's hard looking in that mirror, man. Like when it's you, and when I like look into my 20s, it was probably it would have been pretty hard to diagnose or see, because again, we grew up in that time where I like was listening to like my old Apple Music the other day, and
isn't that so funny when you like find like an old iPad or something or iPod, not even an iPad.
Like, the LMFAO shots song, like I'm like, these are like, this was like the music that we like grew up. It was like fed to us. Yeah. And everybody was binge drinking in college. So it would have been hard to even like see. But once it was like a slow progression where it was like fun to where like it just started to not be fun. And I would get into trouble. I would get other people into trouble, hurt myself, hurt other people. But I still would, even when I wrecked my truck, like I could not add. I had other people telling me like, you should really look at your drinking. Like maybe you should go get help. And I was like, no, like this was just like an accident. It wasn't like, I blamed the people that I worked with, because I was actually with coworkers at the time, which was terrible. I blamed everybody but myself for that car accident. And until I got to really see it, like I got to see the adult version of myself next to my father and how we were identical, it scared the shit out of me. And I think it was the catalyst for what made me be so honest in therapy, because I knew I didn't want to pass this torch to somebody else. Like I knew I didn't want to be like what my dad was for me, for my children. And so that was a motivating factor as well. And then it's wild because that was like 2 years after I got sober for my dad's birthday. I wrote him a letter and I read it to him in the backyard. And I just said like, if I can do this, I know you can. And it's like, life is just amazing sober. Like it's so great. And I like told him that I forgave him. And then he started his own journey, which is crazy.
God, that gets me. That's really, really powerful.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. It was like, the crazy thing is I never would have thought, and it wasn't me. My whole life I spent forcing, thinking I could control him into doing something, thinking I could, if I leave, if I threaten not to come home, if I make all of these threats to him, then he'll do something. But it took me leading by example, I feel like, and showing love. Like those were the two things that really, I think, helped versus me getting angry and yelling and not being compassionate.
People ask me a lot what they can do for somebody in their life who is struggling with alcohol and how they can make them see or change or do something different. And usually my answer is like, there's really not a lot you can do except to love them like really hard. Have your own boundaries, create your own safety that you need to, but like love them really hard and reduce their their stress load, if we think about tools and capacity and all this, like make their life a little bit easier so that they have space to make this change. But I know for me, like if my mom has told me since I quit drinking that she was really close to telling me that she thought I needed to quit drinking. And I'm like, thank God you didn't, because I know how I would have acted and I know how I would have reacted, and I would have burned it to the ground. And that's my experience, but I see it over and over again. It's like you can't force people to make this change, but you can love them through it and give them the capacity to be able to eventually make it stick. And I really like what you said about like in therapy, you were learning tools and you were learning different ways of living and coping that eventually gave you the ability to make this stick long term. And I think that's really important because it's very rare that I can see a person just decide and then they're sober.
Yeah.
There's such a big gulf between who we are when we are using alcohol as a coping mechanism and then who we are as a person who has a sustainable version of sobriety. And there's a lot in between there that is skill building and resilience building and reducing your stress load and all of these different things that contribute cumulatively to the ability to be alcohol free long term. So I think that's really powerful. I hear you using different kinds of language. What do you identify with as far as your own version of sobriety?
For me, and I think like everybody's so different. I think for a lot of people, it's hard to say I'm an alcoholic. It's so hard. For me, like for a while now, I personally, I like identifying as an alcoholic because I feel like it breaks that stigma down more.
Yeah.
Like if I can meet someone and then they ask me why I'm not drinking and I say, oh, because I'm an alcoholic, and I use it loosely, it might be a shock to them at first, but then it kind of is like, I never would have even known that about her. Like I never would have known. And it takes this more of the sting away. And so it's kind of like, that's what I feel the most comfortable and confident with. But I know a lot of people just say they're alcohol free, or there's a lot of different terms that people use now, sober curious.
But that's why I ask, because you seem really confident using that, and it seems natural for you to say that. And I think that that's really powerful when we can say something that feels good and feels natural for us and gives other people the right identifier for us to be able to feel really good in our own version of sobriety. And I think it's really powerful about this idea of breaking down the stigma, because we think of an alcoholic as this gristled old 65-year-old man with a brown bag and a fifth of whiskey. But really, alcohol use disorder, in whatever iteration you want to call it, happens to so many people and so many different kinds of people. And really no one's immune from it. Like you and I don't particularly look like the kind of people who would drink a bottle of wine every night and have an addiction to alcohol. And yet here we are. And the more visibility we can give to different kinds of people on different kinds of paths, the more doors we open for other people to realize, oh, this might be something that I need to look at. Or if she does it that way, if Jenna's doing this, like maybe I can do this too. One of the things, I was digging into the archives of your social media, and I saw you talking about your story and how you used to Google, is it okay to drink a bottle of wine a day?
Yeah.
And you would find websites that would confirm that it is fine, that it's okay. How did you navigate? I love the Google. I'm always like, what was the first thing you Googled? Because all of us have Googled something. All of us Googled something to get where we are now. So how did you navigate that dissonance between, like, you were seeking this information actively, but yet you were being met with things that confirmed your actions? Like, how did you get past that?
Well, I think for me, it was definitely one of the first things that I Googled was, can I drink a bottle of wine, or can you drink 2 bottles of wine? Like, is it bad to drink 2 bottles of wine a night? After I admitted to my therapist, it was like a way for me to be like, Okay, well, Belinda says that it's bad, but look at these 25 women on Reddit. They're saying
Right.
it's okay.
Right. Or the American Heart Association says it like gives me better heart health.
Totally, like if you look, there's so many things. If you are looking for a reason to validate your drinking, like, first of all, I would look further into it. I would really start to dig more into why you're trying to validate it. But you'll find it. You'll find a handful of people that will be like, sure, drink 2 bottles of wine a night. Like, it's not a big deal.
Well, I think that exactly what you said of this idea of like, if you're looking for it, you're going to find it. But I think the looking for it, that's a sign. The first time I ever Googled, well, of course I Googled the like, am I an alcoholic? Am I drinking too much? All of that stuff. But I came to sobriety by Googling yoga to quit drinking. Because I was like, those yoga people, they look like they've got their shit together. Maybe they can fix me. They know what's going on. But, I'm like, if you're Googling this stuff, if you're looking at this stuff on Google and you're looking for answers, you already know the answer. You already know that a bottle of wine every night is not, even if it's not medically healthy, like it's not working for you. It's not working for you. Something about it is harming your spirit. It is impacting your life. And I think that that's a really, I just like got a kick of that. Like, is drinking a bottle of wine a night okay? And it's like, objectively, no, but the internet will tell you that it is okay. But, I think it's really important to combat some of that. People will send me articles all the time of like, here's another article saying that wine is good for heart health. Wine is good for your longevity, like all of this stuff. And it's really interesting because when you look into like where those sources are coming from, a lot of them are funded by alcohol companies. Like the studies themselves are funded by alcohol companies. But, people like you are out there saying like, here's the opposite. Here's the other side to this. Here's the real information. And here's, how we can really dig into what the truth is. And, I think there are a lot of powers that be that are creating this information system and creating this experience where we can find the information we want. So it's so important to be able to send like this other message of like, and here's the other side of it. And here's what addiction can look like. And here's what sobriety can look like. And I think that the modeling of that is really, really powerful. You talked about getting sober with the help of therapy. Do you still go to therapy?
Yes, I go to therapy. Like, it's weird. Like, I'll have like moments where I feel like I need like a tweak, or I know if I am feeling like pregnancy is wild because your hormones are like everywhere. I'll just cry over like, literally my husband left to go see his friend for one night. And like, as soon as he pulled out, I kind of called him. I was like, I don't know why I'm like sitting in bed just like sobbing. Like, I'm like, are you happy here? You're gonna leave me? But like,
he's like, I'm trying to have a night with my friends. Excuse me.
But like, when I feel like, okay, this is something, like, I'll give an example. So recently I went back to therapy. It was right before I got pregnant, actually, just because I was feeling super anxious and I felt no reason, again, like, I feel like I look at my life and I have everything to be thankful for. And when I was feeling like super off, I was like, there's something else that like I could dig into and that I could work on. And what we found was I was focusing on cognitive distortions, which like was so mind blowing for me to learn a lot about. So
can you explain that for folks who aren't familiar?
Yeah. So cognitive distortions, there was a couple that I was really like, if you look, I think there's 12-ish altogether. There might even be more. I feel like for different models, they have like different ones, but
sure.
One of the ones that I was really focused on was like fortune telling. So I would be like, we had something coming up, like like an event or we were traveling, and I would be thinking about a worst case scenario thing that would happen because of it. Like I would say like, oh, we're going to go here, we're going to see this person, and they're not going to like that. I'm totally making this up, but they're not going to like that I don't drink, and so they're going to judge me because of it, and I'm going to feel anxious, and it was really messing with me. So now I'm aware of those, and I'm able to work through them, and I'm not like, there's a whole cycle that you go through with these. So identification is like a way to just stop it right in its tracks, and you're able to not like complete the cycle. But cognitive distortions, totally look them up.
Yeah, we'll Google that later. I asked because it's funny. People that I work with, I work with women who are changing their relationship with alcohol or who have already removed alcohol from their life and are trying to make this feel good. But they're like, I really thought that I would quit drinking and then all my problems would go away.
Nope.
And you're like, nope. You are just experiencing a deeply human experience without taking the edge off, without numbing out, without using a substance to cope. And now you got to do the work of learning how to be a human in the world. And therapy is one of my personal favorites. I'm the same. I'll like dip in and out depending on what's going on in life. But when people are like, wait, you're 4.5 years sober, you teach other people how to do this and you still go to therapy. And I'm like, yeah, man, that's the life. And I find it to be such a rich experience to be able to feel this so fully, to be able to feel this as difficult and as challenging as it can be without numbing out. Because the thing is like, I don't numb out the good stuff either. I don't numb out the joy and the celebration. And like I think about sober weddings are my favorite thing in the whole world, because what a gift to be able to witness this, like one of the biggest days in so many people's lives. And it's usually people we love and we care about. Like what a gift to be able to witness that fully without numbing it out. And I used to be like, oh, there's no bar. Why am I even going? Like, what's the point of going to this wedding?
Which is like not an open bar. What?
Yeah. Like what? Or like if it was like even a good friend, if they were like getting married, to be like, oh, there's no bar or I have to pay for my drinks. Like this sucks. But now it's like, how wild is that I was using a substance to really blunt this really big experience that is such a gift to be able to witness.
So much joy.
So much joy. And so for me, it's like, yeah, it's hard and you still have to do the work, but that also means that you get to reap like some of the most beautiful experiences from it too.
You appreciate the highs more in your life, like those joyous moments, because you are feeling everything. And so like when you go through the peaks and valleys and you're at a peak, you're like, oh my gosh, it's like you feel everything and it's so great.
Tell me about one of those peaks in your life. What has been a really joyful experience that you've had in sobriety?
What's crazy is when you were talking about that, my biggest fear, and I told you I would be like, well, next weekend I'll really stick to it next weekend, or after my birthday I'll get sober. And my biggest hang up, hands down, that me and Belinda would go in circles with in therapy sessions.
I feel like I know Belinda now.
She's amazing.
Shout out to Belinda.
Shout out. Hey, Belinda, I love you. I couldn't wrap my mind around getting married and not drinking. Like I could not fathom it. Like even though I was not having really any fun during this time, because it was like in really like the peak of my addiction, I would lament over it. We would go back and forth and I'd be like, I can't imagine getting married and not having a glass of champagne. Like I wouldn't be able to have a glass of champagne. And she's like, no. I'm like, I can't do it. And in October of 2020, my husband and I got married, and it was absolutely amazing. Like I would just think like, oh my gosh, I'm going to miss out on so much fun without alcohol. And like the irony is you have so much more fun. And it was just beautiful because it was just small because we were in the pandemic. So it was just us. And then our parents and my grandmother and my brother was there. And you know, my husband still drinks. He still like has fun. So do his parents. And then like, so it was like him and his parents, and they had like the best time. And then me and my parents and my grandma, like my brother, like none of us drank, and we still had like such a good time. And at night we stayed in like a farmhouse in like the middle of nowhere, West Virginia. And I like tucked my parents in bed, and I remember my dad I was just like, can you believe it? Can you believe like I got married. We had this like such a fun time without alcohol. And he's like, my dad's like a man of few words. Like he doesn't say much, but he was like, thank you so much. Like this was such like a fun night. And that was like the most joyous moment for me, because I can look back on those pictures and I remember every single moment. Like I was present the whole entire time, and you can just see the joy like on my face, how happy I was the whole day.
That's a good one, man. Every time you talk about your dad, I'm like, okay, I love Mr. Dillulio's dads. Yeah. I have a little soft spot right here. I love it. Well, Jenna, last question that I always ask before we wrap up this podcast is, if the story of you and alcohol and your sobriety were to be published, what would it be titled, and what kind of story would it be?
I think it would be titled The Generational Curse Breaker, because I think I, not meaning to, like was able to, and I know I can't prevent everything from happening to my child, and I know there's a lot that's out of my control, but I know I did everything within my control to not give them the upbringing that I had. And not only that, like I was able to be a good example, and they're going to have like such a great grandfather now too. And like, I think that would be my story.
Yeah, that's a good one. You know, I think that that's really, really important for so many parents out there to hear right now, because I think that there can be this sense of guilt and this sense of fear of, what if my kid has the same challenges? And what I tell people in that experience is, well, thank God they have you to model the other side of it. Thank God they are growing up in a different experience than you did, or a different experience than they would if you hadn't gotten sober. Because yes, genetics are genetics. And yes, we know that addiction is something that people are more sensitive to if there are family histories. But nature versus nurture, like modeling behavior in the environment in which you grow up in, and the conversations you have around alcohol and being a person who doesn't drink, all of that matters too. So that's a hell of a title. I look forward to reading that book.
Thank you.
All right, Jenna. Well, thank you so much for being here, for sharing your story with us. Tell us how we can connect with you, what you have going on in your world. Tell us about that shirt that you're wearing that I already commented on, and how much I love it. How can our listeners get connected with you?
So I am on Instagram, I'm on TikTok, I'm on Facebook, and it's Jenna Dillulio. So I know we had it's such a hard last name, but you can look up Your Sober Bestie.
Yeah, Your Sober Bestie. Okay, search Your Sober Bestie, and we'll also spell it in the show notes, because I'm sure I've butchered it about 7 times too. So
yeah, I right now am really focusing on my business. I'm writing my first ebook right now.
Amazing.
So I'm super excited about that. Yeah, and this is my merch that I have that I designed. There's a bunch of different colors and it's pretty neutral, but I just wanted
love
something
it.
plain that
I'm a
could
neutral
wear
kind of
out.
gal. Obviously, if you watch our YouTube channel, I'm probably wearing this sweater in every single one of them. But for those who can't, for those who are not watching our YouTube channel, Jenna has a great shirt that says "alcohol less" in like really cool typography. So I've already like added to cart. It's on my radar. It's in her merch store. It's really great.
Yeah, it's on my Instagram. Well, and you can go to jennadillulio.com, but it's like a play off of words. So I don't know if you know, Scott Disick has a brand called Talentless.
Oh, I
And
don't.
he has
I'm
this
like kind of
whole
illiterate.
line.
I love it.
So I loved just the simplicity of it because he just had he just has t-shirts and hoodies and they're super plain and basic. And I was like, it would be cool to do like a play on words with that and do alcoholless. So
well, I still like the t-shirt anyway, even though my pop culture knowledge is lacking. I think it's a great t-shirt either way.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, Jenna, thank you so much for your story. I know that there are so many people who need to hear this and hear you share both your story and your dad's story and the words that you use that feel really good and powerful for you. And I just will be on baby watch. Got a couple more months for you and looking forward to that cute little baby.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It was an honor to be on here. Thank you.